Got my Black Panther shirt on. You know, at Lumen Pictures, we get crew t-shirts for some of the projects that we work on. This one's obviously for Black Panther. It's actually one of my favorite shirts. Yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so I got this Maya scene here, and look at this mess. I mean, things are just thrown all over this scene at the root level. And, you know, it gives me OCD, really. I'm looking at you guys, you modelers. You guys are the worst at organizing things. And if you're not, then you're probably better off being a rigger. Because, you know, if you're OCD too, then I think you might like rigging instead of modeling. Anyways, I digress. I'm going to select all this crap, you know, everything. And I've got these groups here. What I want to do is run this short piece of code. And look at that. It's parented everything and it's done it in a nice way. Look, it's grouped all the things called vertical inside of this vertical group. It's grouped all the things called diagonal inside a diagonal group, and so on and so forth. And look at this. This scene is nice and clean now. Now, there was a lot of objects, and I wouldn't have wanted to do this by hand. Hell no. And how do we do this? Well, we use a little bit of a trick. We use something in Python called an if statement. We're using a conditional. I mean, this is a programming thing in general. Conditionals are so important to programming because it makes your Python code go from being dumb to being, you know, kind of smart. So let's begin. Alright, so the first thing I want to show you guys is basically how to turn a string into a list of strings. So I have the string here, Jamie is cool. What I want to do is I want to split this up so that instead of Jamie is cool as one string, it's a list, and inside the list is each one of these words as its own thing. So if I do dot split, this is how you do it. And I run this code. You can see what it's giving me back is it's a list, and inside the list is a bunch of strings. So of course I can store this. I'm going to store in A, and then I can access different parts of the string. I mean, different parts of this list. So I'm going to access, you know, the first item, which is Jamie. I'm going to put 1, it's going to give me is, and of course if I put 2, it's going to give me cool. And, you know, that's kind of, you know, it should be a little bit familiar now, accessing different items inside of the string. But what if we want to split this string, not based on these spaces, because if we just run the split, what it's doing is it's taking the spaces and it's figuring out what is on either side of the space, and it's giving that back as a separate string inside the list. But what if I do something like this? The milk man is my dad. So what if I want to split this? If I just run this code, you can see it's giving me a list, but it's giving me just this giant string inside, just one item, and it hasn't really split the words. What I can actually do is put, you know, a string here with just the underscore, and I'm saying look inside this big string and look for all the underscores and use that as the delimiter. And that's the term that this is called. It's called a delimiter. Whatever you put here is the delimiter that you want to use to split the string. So run this again. You can see I get each word individually now rather than just the big string. I'm getting the milkman, etc. And of course, if I change whatever's going on inside here, if I put like a different thing, not like an underscore, I'll put like a semicolon. And I run this code again. It's going to keep this as a whole thing, but it's going to split my dad because it's looking for the underscores. But of course I can change this to semicolon now. And if I run this, it's basically splitting it, looking for the semicolon now. And, you know, of course, when it gets to the end, it doesn't have any semicolons. It's just keeping this as a whole thing. And of course, if I make a space there and I run this again, it's not going to split the space. It's going to keep it because it's just looking for whatever's in here now. So without anything there, it's going to look for the space. with something there, it's going to look for whatever that thing is. And that's basically how you split a string. And why is that relevant? Well, we're going to basically take these object names here. You can see all these object names and all these group names. Even though it's kind of like a mess right now, it's just like things are just everywhere. It's not really organized. It's at least named pretty decently. You know, it's got like a prefix, scaffold. It's got this middle portion, and then it's got like the suffix. What we're going to do is we're going to split the name of each one of these objects. We just want the middle portion because this is the important part. This is what's identifying what this type of object is. And you can see here, we've got like these groups here, and very similarly, you know, these groups, the middle portion is the identifying portion of this group, right? Because this is just like underscore group. It's not much use. And this is just scaffold. It's like everything's got scaffold on it. But we can use this middle portion to compare what the object name is to what group it should be in. We're basically going to look for what's inside this middle portion and what's inside this middle portion. And if there's some sort of correlation, it's going to group it inside. So how do we do that? Well, we need to use something called a conditional. And this is like a general programming thing. A conditional is very powerful. Conditionals basically allow us to say, if something is true, do it. If it's not true, don't do it, you know? And it basically turns your code from being pretty dumb to like, you know, kind of smart because you're giving it some sort of logic. Now the code can do a bit of thinking for you. So how do we do that in Python? Well, we use the if statement. And if is a special keyword inside of Python. And when you put the if, Python knows that, oh, a conditional is coming. So if you say, if something is true, then do something. So what is that I'm going to do? I'm just going to print here and just say this is true. And I'm going to come back up here. So what is the condition? Let's just use something really simple. We're going to say if true, print this is true. And I've run this. It's gonna be true. Because true is also a keyword. True it's a type of data inside of Python, much like a string or a number, but it's called a Boolean. And a Boolean has two states. It has true or it has false. Those are the only two values a Boolean can have. You know, true, false, 1, 0, yes, no. It's basically a way to say yes or no, black, white, etc. True, false, black, white, yes, no. All that kind of good stuff. So this is true, it's going to print. If I change this to false, it's not going to print. And if I run this, you can see it hasn't printed it because, you know, it's not true. So it's not executing this code. So anytime this condition is true, it's going to do the bottom. It's going to execute the code at the bottom of it, inside the indentation. And if it's false, it's not going to execute it. So a good example to show you guys is something like this. I'm going to do 1. If 1 is greater than 0. Now, if I copy this code and just paste it up here to show you guys as an example, you know, I run this, you can see that it's going to result in true. What this resolves as is either true or false, right? So if I swap this around, I go 1 is less than 0. Now everyone knows 1 is not less than 0, so I run this, it's going to say false. 1 is not less than 0. Okay, so this statement here, what I'm doing is, you know, when you execute it, it's going to either give you a true or a false result. So I can use that basically to say if something is greater than something, print true. So this is going to print true because, you know, this is true. Now, if I reverse it and I run this again, it's not going to print it because obviously this results in false. And if I put a negative here, it's true again because -1 is less than 0. It's going to print this. This is true. And we can also use something like, we can test whether a piece of string is inside of another piece of string. So I can say something like Billy is awesome. And, you know, if Billy is inside of this, if this shorter string Billy is inside of this longer string, Billy is awesome, it's going to print this is true. And I run this, this is true because, of course, I am awesome. But just to show you guys in it, like again, if I just copy this condition that I'm placing after this if statement, if I just run this on its own, it's going to give me true. But if I remove something, like if I change Billy, so it's just Bill now, you know, is Billy inside of this string? It's not inside of this string anymore because it's just Bill now. It's not the full, it's not this whole string inside here. So if I run this, it's going to give me false. So much the same, if I remove this Y and I run this code again, you know, it's not going to print it because Billy isn't inside here. Now, if you just take a look at how we've named things, we've got these groups here and we've got this short string here, like plank, but we've got these longer strings here, like plank bar. We've got plank, like just right there. And we've got like plank barrier. You see, we can use whatever is inside here. You can say if this piece of string here is inside of this whole string here, or better yet, we can just say if it's inside here, then parent this to that, right? Parent it inside this group. That's basically what we're gonna do. So the first thing that we need to do is, of course, import maya.cmds as cmds, and that will give us access to all the Maya commands. What I want to do is get all the names of these groups and basically store it. So I can just use the cmds.ls sl is equal to true command. And if you guys remember, that just gives me a list. Gives me a list of all the names of the things that I have selected. But I want to print this out so that I get a nice long line like this, rather than this like unformatted thing. You know, I get this. I'm just going to paste that there, and then I can store this. I'm going to call the group names. That's what I'm going to call the variable, just group names, because it's just the name of the groups, right? Nothing too crazy there. And the next thing I want to do is basically select all this stuff and then loop over every single object that I have selected. So what I can do is, again, I can use a for loop. For I in cmds.ls sl is equal to true, and then put the colon. What this is going to do is it's basically going to loop over all the items I have selected. So if you recall from the last lesson, it's just going over every single one and basically storing all the names, you know, inside of this I, this temporary variable I. And then each time it runs the loop, each iteration of the loop, it's going to be a different object. So it's going to have a different name stored under I. And if I just print it, you can see what's going to happen. It's just printing all the names. You can see like that. But what we want is we want the middle portion of the name, because that's the important part. So how do we get the middle portion of the name? Well, we can use the split. So if I just take I and I split it and give the delimiter of underscore, we're using underscore as the delimiter, as the method of splitting this. So if I just print this now and run it again, you can see it's giving me a list for each item. It's giving me a list, and the zero, the first item, which is item 0, is scaffold, and we don't really need that. We don't really care about that. We want this. So this is item number 1. So item 0, item 1, item 2. You know, you kind of get the idea. We want item 1, which is the middle portion. So what I'm going to do is store this in a variable. So I'm going to call this object name parts. So it's the name, the name of the object name, but it's the parts of it. And down here, I'm going to say the object, I'm going to call it main name, because this is the main part of the name. And what the main part of the name is the 0. Not the 0, the number 1, you know, the first item in the list. Not the first item, like as in the first item, but it's like this is the 0 item and this is the item 1, you know, like, yeah, I don't actually know what you call it. It's kind of confusing why it starts off at 0, but that's just how programming is. So now if I run this, actually let's print it. Let's just print object main name. You can kind of see, and I'll run this. You see, it's just giving me the middle portion of each one of these objects names, and that's what we want. It's a good start. So clear this off. Now I'm going to do something similar. I need a loop over all the groups that we have. We've got all the groups here. What I can do is loop over all the groups and say for group in group names. So it's going to store each one of these groups in this temporary variable called grp. For each one of these groups, it's going to loop over it. And then we want to basically do the exact same thing. So I want to say grp name parts is equal to grp dot split underscore. And you can see it's similar to what we're doing up there where we're splitting the object name. Here we're just splitting the group name. And if I print it, grp name parts, and let's just select one item for now so it doesn't print a huge list. So for each item I have selected, it's going to loop over the item, but it's also going to additionally loop over all the groups that we have. So it's doing a loop within a loop. So now if I just print this, you can see I get all the group names, which is the groups that we have up here, and that we've stored down here in the code. And we want the middle name again. So what I can do is the same thing. I can do grp main name is equal to this group name parts, but I just want item 1 inside of this group name parts. And of course, if I just print this again, just to verify the result, and I have just one of these objects selected, and I run this, you can see it's just getting the middle name parts of these groups. So we're almost there now. Now the last thing to do is to compare this main part of this object name with the main part of this group name. So if there's some sort of correlation, it'll parent it underneath. So Maya, if you remember Maya, you can parent stuff by selecting the child and then selecting the parent. So I can select like short plank barrier and I want to put it in short plank group. And then you hit P and that parents it. So that's the order that you want to parent things in. You get the child first, then you get the parent. And inside of Maya, there's a command. So if I just make a new line just to show you guys as an example, I can, take this name. There's a command called cmds.parent, and I can put the child name here. And if I get the parent name, which is this one, I'm going to parent to this object. I can just put that object's name in between, the quotations as well. Now, if I run just this parent line, I don't need anything selected because I've already got the names down here of what I want to parent, what the child should be and what the parent should be. Run this code. You can see it's parented it underneath there. It's done it for me. Well, we basically want to do the same thing, except we want to use the names that we've basically gotten here, these main name parts, as a method for automatically parenting it. We're getting Python to do a bit of thinking for us. So let's come down and let's use an if statement. That's how we're going to do this. So I'm going to say if I'm going to say if the group name is inside the object name, then do this, then parent, cmds.parent. And then what do I want to parent? Well, I want to parent the object, which is here, I'm going to put this as the first thing in this function, and then the second thing is the group. So I want to parent the object to the group. And it's basically saying so I have this middle thing here, like plank, for example. So I've got plank, and then if I just come down to something like plank bar, what I'm saying is, if plank is inside of this plank bar, which it is, you can see there's plank there, then it's going to take this and it's going to put it inside there and it's going to parent it for me. And it's just going to go through every single one of these objects. So short plank barrier, you can see I have a short plank group here. So if short plank is inside of short plank barrier, which it is, then it's going to take this guy and it's going to put it inside there for me. So if I select all this code and then I just run this piece of code, I'm just going to remove some of these spaces like this, and then just run the code. You can see it's done it. It's basically went through and it's parented everything. You can see all the things that have plank inside of it have been parented under the plank group. If I open this guy up, all the things that have horizontal in it have been parented inside this horizontal group, and so on and so forth. And then I didn't have to like manually parent all these like million objects, you know, by hand, because that's crazy. It's what crazy people do. And that's basically it. It's how you use some conditional inside of, you know, your code in order to do something, like make it a little bit smarter. You know, make it think a bit. Like it's basically thinking, oh, is this in here? Yeah, it is. I'll put it in there. And, you know, it's making your code a little bit smarter. But yeah, and I think next week we're going to go over some functions, how to make functions, what functions are, how you run functions. So yeah, stick around.